Good evening and welcome to Primetime Lawmakers, GPB's nightly coverage of the Georgia General Assembly for Thursday, February 9th, 2012, the 18th legislative day of the 2012 session. I'm Scott Slade. Coming up in tonight's program, new life for the Charter Schools Amendment. The House votes today to reconsider the resolution to allow state charter schools. The measure failed on the floor yesterday. Prompted by widespread complaints from the agriculture industry, the Senate urges Congress to expand the federal guest worker program. The Capitol celebrates Georgia Day, the anniversary of the European settlement of the colony of Georgia, and the real celebrities were on paper. We'll explain in a moment. And it's the end of the legislative week. A lot has happened. I'll be joined by our two resident legislative experts, Buddy Darden and Bill Crane, to talk about it all. All that and more is coming up in Primetime Lawmakers. But first, we go live to Sandra Parrish at the state capitol, where, as expected, charter schools came up again today in the House.
Scott, that's right. The House voted 114 to 49 to reconsider its actions from yesterday when it failed to pass a constitutional amendment to allow the state to create charter schools. Co-sponsor Alicia Thomas Morgan tells me she'll be working into next week to try to convince her fellow Democrats to support the measure. She hopes the enabling legislation, which will spell out how state charter schools will be funded, will help.
What I appreciate about this process is that it really has been open and we've really listened to people's concerns, very valid concerns. And so perhaps if that will be helpful, that if we begin to write what will be the enabling legislation and gives people more comfort about how these schools will be funded and how this will be done, then perhaps that will give people more faith.
The difference between enabling legislation and the constitutional amendment is that one has the force and effect of permanent law. It is very difficult to change the constitutional amendment. It takes 91 votes to change a piece of legislation, and it can change from day to day. And so while I appreciate the fact that Representative Morgan trusts the enabling legislation, my issue is not who's here today, it's who's here tomorrow. We're having an election year. The next legislature may decide that they don't mean it, that they didn't agree with us. And if we don't put it in the Constitution today, we will have no way to protect the students that we care about so much.
Representative Abrams tells me she is willing to sit down with the other side to work out a compromise. The State House also approved a bill today to allow students at private colleges to use their school IDs as identification for voting. Representative Morgan told House members that it's the same right that public college students already have.
Students who attend public universities and colleges can use their ID, so we're wanting students who attend private colleges to be able to use theirs. That list of private colleges is a very narrow list. These are colleges that are receiving HOPE funds, and so these are not, your overnight type colleges. These are bona fide private colleges: Brunel University, Emory, Spelman, Morehouse.
There's no established guidelines for a photo ID at any of these private institutions. There's not even a penalty if you produce a fraudulent student ID at one of these private schools. I just think that we're opening up a Pandora's box if we allow a non-government entity to issue IDs, photograph or not, and allow people to vote on them.
That bill passed 122 to 35 and now goes to the Senate. The House Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee heard testimony early this morning on a couple of bills, one involving the right to carry, the other involving stiffer penalties for drivers who lead police on a high-speed chase.
Criminals do not stop and ask for permission to carry firearms. They have never done so, and they never will.
Gun advocates call Georgia's carry permit an infringement on their Second Amendment rights.
I'm a concerned citizen. Our Second Amendment has been infringed upon, and it guarantees us the right to bear arms, and that has been infringed upon by the laws that we have currently here in the state.
Having a Georgia weapons carry permit would be optional under the bill by Representative Jason Spencer.
Right now, the current process is if you are a law-abiding citizen, you have to go towards the probate court and get a gun permit, fingerprint, and pay essentially a fee or a tax to essentially exercise your Second Amendment right.
But law enforcement officials call it a safety issue.
We took a vote that we were opposed to anyone being able to carry a handgun without a license. We consider it a public safety issue, and we are very concerned that many other legal impediments would result from that.
The committee also heard testimony on a couple of bills by Representative Bill Hembry to make it a felony to elude police.
And we're one of the few states in the country that just classifies it as a misdemeanor. You have to meet 5 conditions for it to be a felony. And a poor law enforcement officer shouldn't have to be thinking about, well, does it meet this condition or that condition? They should be able to go and stop that person. And if they are eluding, then they should be convicted as a felon.
He says suspects could also lose their vehicle.
So if you're on a motorcycle and you're eluding police officers, or in your car, they can seize your vehicles, hopefully to send a message to those guys and also to protect the public. You know, there's so many high-speed chases taking place in Georgia, and this is just a measure to protect the citizens and also law enforcement in doing their work.
Now, that law enforcement official you just saw was Putnam County Sheriff Howard Sills, who's also with the Georgia Sheriff's Association. And Scott, the committee told Representative Spencer and Hembry that it will look at both bills and take them up again at a future meeting.
Sandra, it's kind of interesting who is actually one of the driving forces behind this push to further criminalize police chases.
That's right, Scott. Someone you and I both know very well. WSB radio traffic reporter Captain Herb Emery actually brought the need for this legislation to Representative Hembry, and he is the reason that Hembry is sponsoring it.
Well, he's seen a lot of things happen from that helicopter. Thanks very much, Sandra. The Georgia Legislative Black Caucus believes the equality and scholarship programs are in question for students across the state. The caucus unveiled a package of bills today aimed at lessening what they call the gap between those who pay into the Hope and Zell Millership scholarship programs and those who receive them. Senator Lester Jackson, the author of the legislative package, spoke on the matter, saying that most of the program's recipients are from suburban Atlanta areas, while low-income and minority populations disproportionately provide the resources, buying the lottery tickets. Within the legislative package, the GLBC says they are aiming to ensure that the scholarships and grants provide opportunities for all students around the state. Advocates for the fair tax just might have a reason to be hopeful. The Senate Finance Committee met today to discuss the proposed creation of a Senate study committee to examine the fair tax. In case you're wondering what the fair tax is, according to the national organization Americans for Fair Taxation, it is a plan that abolishes all federal, personal, and corporate income taxes, gift, estate, capital gains, alternative minimum, Social Security, Medicare, and self-employment taxes, and replaces them with one simple, visible federal retail sales tax administered primarily by existing state sales tax authorities. The resolution to create the study committee received a do pass recommendation by substitute and now moves on to Senate rules. That action, of course, has no impact on any federal legislation that is pending before Congress, but it's going to make Neil Bortz very happy. We go back down to the Capitol now, where our Keosha Howard is standing by. And what happened in the Senate today, Keosha?
Scott, Georgia farmers caught in the middle of the battle over immigration might be getting some relief. Today, the Senate passed a measure urging Congress to expand eligibility for the H-2A guest worker program.
Many farmers want to hire legal workers and they want to use the guest worker program, but they get frustrated with the dysfunctional program. What this urging resolution does is it encourages the cooperation of the Department of Labor and the Department of Agriculture, so the Department of Agriculture can administer the program. They know more about the needs of the farmers and can expedite the program. The other urging is to allow the state to get a waiver to do our own guest worker program.
While there was no opposition to the bill, Democrats say passage of the state's illegal immigration law last year has led to the agriculture crisis.
When I got in the well and was speaking about HB 87 a year ago, I talked about the fact that we were trying to put a Band-Aid on a buckshot wound. And now we're trying to put a Band-Aid, and not even one of the big Band-Aids, I'm talking about one of the little ones for a nail paper cut, on a self-inflicted buckshot wound, because we passed a bill that is costing this state hundreds of millions of dollars.
I want to be clear, this bill will not carry the force of law. If it achieves final passage, it simply lets the federal government know what the state would like to do. Now let's take a look at an old Senate tradition. When a new legislature introduces his first bill, he's subject to an old ritual, a mild form of hazing. Here's Senator John Wilkinson. Let's watch.
This bill would repeal the Treated Timber Products Act of 1973. This is a bill that would provide for more efficient government.
Why, in your infinite wisdom, would you think it necessary to tear from the pages of the laws of the people of Georgia?
Senator, I'm sure in 1973 when the bill was passed that there was a real need for that, but things have changed some since 1973.
And most bills have the phrase in it, moral turpitude. Could you tell me why that's not in this bill and what that phrase means? Could you give me the definition of that?
No.
And after some more light banter, the bill did pass unanimously, and once again, that was Senator John Wilkinson. Also, the Senate now wants all foreclosed property owners, residential and commercial, to know that the property they're occupying will be sold out from under them. Scott, currently, law only requires sale notice for residences.
Georgia's a non-judicial foreclosure state. Thank you very much, Kiosha. Legislation meant to safeguard Georgia's students was addressed yesterday by the House Health and Human Services Committee. The most heated issue, a bill sponsored by Representative Billy Mitchell targeting concussions sustained in school sports. Primetime Lawmakers' Kelly Murray has more on the Return to Play Act.
Georgia's Return to Play Act would require the State Board of Education to create mandatory policies to deal with school sports injuries, particularly concussions.
Concussions are one of the most commonly reported injuries in children and adolescents who participate in sports and recreational activities.
The bill requires any student athlete who is suspected of a brain injury during a practice or game to be taken out immediately. Before returning to a game or practice, they would have to be evaluated by a healthcare provider and receive written confirmation from a doctor to return to the sport.
This bill will make sports and recreational activities better by making them safer. It will ensure that a youth athlete who sustains a concussion has the necessary time to heal and recover and will not be at risk of further, more serious injury.
There's a lack of knowledge regarding these head injuries among youth athletes and coaches of the bill. And if passed, it will raise awareness to help change the culture on these issues.
But is football ready for this cultural shift? Only time will tell. For Primetime Lawmakers, I'm Kelly Murray.
No vote was taken on the measure, but more hearings will be scheduled. Well, Georgia Day at the Capitol always brings excitement for history buffs and citizens alike. Georgia's original copies of the Colonial Charter and Declaration of Independence were on hand for the ceremonies. Primetime Lawmakers' Jackie Britton takes you there.
Echoes of 1776 rang out today at the state capitol, where students gathered with Governor Nathan Deal to celebrate the founding of the colony and state of Georgia. In addition to the celebration, Governor Deal officially declared Sunday, February 12th, Georgia Day, the 279th anniversary of the settling of Georgia by Europeans.
It is my privilege on this very special occasion to present a proclamation declaring Sunday, February the 12th, as Georgia Day.
And to add to the festivities and spirit of celebrating Georgia, two very sacred documents were on display: the Royal Charter for the Colony of Georgia and, of course, Georgia's official copy of the Declaration of Independence. Georgia's handwritten official copy of the Declaration of Independence was not lost but forgotten during a very tumultuous time in Georgia. However, it was recently rediscovered in 2007 by an archive staff member.
The recorded copy of the Declaration of Independence was not really lost. It was, I guess we would say, misplaced to a certain extent. It had been carefully bound into records that are housed at the archives, so the current staff did not remember that it was there. We had not had a reason to actively search for it.
These documents are so precious that they must be preserved in a dark and high security vault at 60 degrees to preserve the authenticity of the handwritten pages. These original copies give a window into some of the most important moments in Georgia's history. Amazingly, they survived the havoc of the American Revolution and the Civil War. They were preserved in part because they were bound together and forgotten. If you miss them today, they are always accessible online at www.georgiaarchives.org. Reporting for Primetime Lawmakers, I'm Jackie Britton.
And who were the three Georgia signers of the Declaration of Independence? Stew on that in just a moment. We'll get back to you with the answers after we review week 6 of the legislative session. Education issues have dominated the political landscape, but other legislative movement happened as well. And Kiosha Howard has the highlights for their week in review.
This week, under the Gold Dome. On Monday, the 15th legislative day, Governor Nathan Deal announced a new needs-based scholarship. REACH, Realizing Educational Achievement Can Happen, will award $2,500 per semester to certain economically disadvantaged students in good standing for college.
With the goal of providing those long-term opportunities for education to those who might not otherwise make it to college, Reach scholars will be selected at the local level in the middle schools, and they will be required to sign a contract that they will remain crime, drug, and behavior issue-free, that they will maintain a certain grade point average, and that they will meet with a volunteer mentor until they graduate from high school.
Democrats held a press conference criticizing the plan.
I certainly have no problem with need-based aid. I think that it's a valuable component, but that program, the reason we're talking about it today is to avoid a conversation about hope.
On Tuesday, the Senate passed 3 bills. One of those seeks to make Georgia more health provider friendly by limiting government regulation. Senator Greg Goggins explains.
This bill does 2 things. It maintains that the medical and dental licensure remains a function of skill, training and education, and testing competence. It also states that physicians and dentists not be required to participate in a third-party reimbursement program as a condition of licensures. And it reaffirms that the Georgia Composite Board of Medical Examiners and the Georgia Board of Dentists has the sole responsibility for licensing these health care providers.
That measure passed and now awaits a House vote. Also passing the Senate, a plan to dismantle the 3-year-old Georgia Aviation Authority. Under the privatization plan, existing staff and aircraft will move back to the Department of Natural Resources and the Georgia Forestry Commission. Remaining aircraft will be sold.
That is yet to be determined. We have requests for proposals out to move those functions to the private sector. And we would, in fact, hopefully find it very advantageous to dispose of those airplanes on the market, put those assets back in the bank, and move forward.
The Senate also gave final passage to a bill that would allow graduates of 3-year nursing programs to be licensed as both registered and practical nurses. That bill passed unanimously and now goes to the governor. Also on Tuesday, the fate of chartered schools got before legislators' eyes. Last year, the Georgia Supreme Court ruled the state doesn't have the right to approve charter schools nor use local dollars to fund them. The House Education Committee approved a measure that would allow voters to determine their fate.
We are simply amending it and adding one new category of special schools. So now it reads, special schools shall include charter schools as defined and provided for by law, provided, however, that special schools shall only be public schools.
But some Democrats say those changes are not enough.
H.R. 1162 attempted today to make a change by saying that they're going to include special schools in the definition, include charter schools in the definition. But they flatly refused to address the funding issue. And the funding issue is at the core of this debate. Do we pay for public schools on the local level with state support, or does the state have the right to reach into every one of your pockets, take money from it, and allocate it as it sees fit to the charter schools it chooses, or worse, to the special schools it defines?
The House Education Committee passed the resolution, and on Wednesday, the 17th legislative day, it was debated on the House floor.
I am concerned that the state would have unprecedented power to create charter schools under the guise of a very vague definition without any constraints other than the ability to change the law to accommodate their end.
Well, first, it sounds like you don't support charter schools.
It's about those little girls in green jackets. I'm referring to the girls at Ivy Preparatory Academy, a charter school in Gwinnett County that is all girls, 98% of color, and 70% free and reduced lunch, where last year 100% of their school met and exceeded standards on English language arts, 94% of them met and exceeded standards on math.
If you vote for this bill, it would take away money from local taxpayers. That's not good. If you can afford a green jacket, you can pay for a charter school.
The measure, however, failed, missing the mark by only 10 votes. And that's a look back at what happened this week under the Gold Dome.
Thanks, Yoshi. Extra credit question this morning. The Georgia signers of the Declaration of Independence, Button Gwinnett, Lyman Hall, George Walton. We've got to take a short break in Primetime Lawmakers, but don't go anywhere. There's much more to come just ahead. End of the week analysis with Buddy Darden, a former state legislator and congressman, and Bill Crane, political analyst with CSI Crane. Among other things, we'll talk about the real undertow on the charter schools question. We'll be right back. The end of another week under the Gold Dome. 18 days of the annual 40-day General Assembly have come to a close. A few moments ago, you saw highlights for the week under the Gold Dome. Charter schools, the REACH Scholarship, Georgia Aviation Authority. Legislation is beginning to move. Joining us now to put it in perspective, Buddy Darden, former state legislator and congressman who is senior counsel at McKenna, Long, and Aldrich, and Bill Crane, political analyst with CSI Crane. Great to have you with us. Let's get right to it. As Buddy, you were saying off camera, the real undertow on the charter schools question, state charter schools.
That's right. There was a lot more to that vote than just the charter schools itself, because the entire public education community, as articulated by Herb Garrett on this program earlier this week, feels like there's been an assault on public education, not only because of the lessening of the homeschool requirements, but because of the tuition tax credit for private schools, about a $50 million giveaway. And they looked at this as one more assault on the public schools, so it became more symbolic as an attack on public schools rather than the charter school issue itself. So I'm surprised that they got 110 votes, and I think they made a very, very good try. And I was surprised because people all over the board on this, Republicans from southeast and southwest Georgia voted against it, and then you had Democrats from different places voting for it. I couldn't find.
There aren't a lot of charter schools, quite frankly, south of Macon, Georgia.
Yeah. Right.
And so it's largely a Metro Atlanta issue and an issue of who do you trust? Who do you trust to control the dollars? Who do you trust to take the local dollars? And I think in the end, some very emotional and impactful floor debate, particularly we didn't see Stacey Abrams on that point, but she talked about the little girls with the green vest, and she said, I care about those little girls, but I also care about those children who may have been eating their only meal of the day in a public school, and what happens if you take those dollars away.
But I thought it was a fine moment, though, for the Georgia legislature, because we finally had a substantive debate on something that mattered. I mean, we've seen so many things up there this year that really didn't matter very much. In fact, Chairman
resolutions generally aren't the most
Chairman John Meadows of the Rules Committee said we're going to try to keep some of this trash from coming up this year and try to hold back on just passing something just to say we're passing bills. And so I thought this was a good hour and a good time for the Georgia legislature, because they debated the bill in a very sensible, orderly, and intelligent way. And regardless of where you are on the issue, I thought it was a good time for the Georgia legislature.
And local charter schools are still the rule of the land. We're talking about state charter schools, and they're going to take that issue up. Sorry.
Oh, yeah,
we
still got charter schools. There'll be plenty of charter schools around. So this is not the death knell of charter schools.
The state Senate has urged Congress to expand the guest worker provisions so we can get a few more folks on Georgia farms down here. Think that's going to go anywhere?
I do think it will. I think there are a couple of tweaks. They're looking back at the immigration bill last year, and we have not been sued by the federal U.S. Justice Department yet. So correct. So far.
Yep. Other issues dealing with the Hope Scholarship and the whole idea of a needs-based scholarship, the REACH Scholarship.
Yeah, the REACH. Well, there's the new scholarship the governor unveiled this week. That's a needs-based scholarship, and initially has $25 million or something from AT&T.
$25 million.
Yeah. And then there's revisiting the discussion of, is Hope going to be a merit-based scholarship or a needs-based scholarship with an income cap of $140,000 a household? And I think it's going to see some traction, but I don't think that this leadership and this governor are going to let that happen this session.
Here's something they need to do is go back to the original purpose of Hope and confine it to, in my opinion, public universities in the University of Georgia system, technical public colleges, and not let all of these other people come in and get part of the money. I think that's been one of the problems.
They've got remedial, they've got graduate school, postgrad.
Absolutely. It's become a jobs program.
It's become a big wagon. And I don't think it can carry the weight that it's got in it now, particularly with all of the demand coming on pre-K on one end as well as on Hope.
They can keep the cap off of the income if they narrow the scope of it, but they can't do everything for everybody.
We're seeing moves to consolidate and narrow state government, the aviation department being reabsorbed in other departments, getting rid of a personnel department, that sort of thing. That seems to be something that's moving forward.
And I attended a House Appropriations meeting today, and there were repeated questions off the panel to various state agencies, particularly in the education area, that are presenting that are not a part of the State Department of Education now, about why they couldn't roll back up underneath. So yeah, I think that is the leadership again wants to come up with 2 or 3 things at the back end of this session to say that they've done that are concrete, and consolidating some state agencies are one of those.
Well, GDOT has always controlled the planes, and and out at Fulton County Airport. That'll be a change in culture for state officials not to have that at their beck and call.
Well,
so I'll be interested to see what happens there.
And of course, Governor Perdue was a hobby pilot. He liked having all those toys.
There was some nice craft out
They
there. They
really
got rid
were.
of the jets, but they still...
Yeah, they really were. Let's move on to maybe a bigger political issue here, presidential politics. You know, coming to town, Mitt Romney in town yesterday, and it looks like Newt Gingrich is not going to give up the flag very easily, is he?
Well, my Romney friends tell me that they raised $350,000 yesterday.
I was wondering.
And that there were some very interesting people who showed up, and the Romney folks claim that they're peeling off some of the Gingrich folks. But,
folks
Bill,
who
this
were
is your
offensive.
crowd. You'll have to tell me.
My former boss, Mike Bowers, was one of those who was at the Romney event last night. So I think a lot of the GOP establishment that had been fence-sitting between Governor Perdue and Governor Deal and Zell Miller backing Newt have started to come off the fence, and more are breaking in the way of Mitt Romney than are for Speaker Gingrich. But Rick Santorum had a good week, and I think in Georgia, that Mike Huckabee factor, both the Tea Party being so strong here and the Christian evangelical community, it could also be better than expected for Rick Santorum.
And of course, if Gingrich doesn't do well in Georgia,
he's done.
I think he's history. Yeah.
And Congress is suffering some of the worst ratings, popularity ratings in history. 10%
warm bucket
and lower.
of spit, as the House Minority Leader.
How do you run against that? I mean, we have congressional races as well coming up.
I'm not sure some of them don't deserve it. You know, Congress has inflicted this upon themselves. It's not like, you know, they are the victim of circumstance, but they have turned this rhetoric up. They've taken each other to task, and finally, I think they're the victims of their own gridlock.
And finally, I heard Bernie Marcus say in an interview earlier this week on the radio that under the current regulations, Home Depot would be a tiny chain of 12 stores in Florida and Georgia, maybe. Do you see us really moving forward with this red tape initiative to encourage small business here, eliminating regulations?
The hearing was good. It's always the devil's in the details. And you know, I am a small business person, and the state can be, but isn't generally speaking, very helpful to entrepreneurs.
I think Mr. Marcus, a good friend of mine, by the way, has a tendency to maybe overstate things a little bit. You know, he started off as a stand-up comic before he went in business.
He's still very good.
So he's got a great gift of being able to make his point, and I respect him very much, but I think he might have overstayed a little bit.
Okay. All right. Well, among the things we'll be watching, and we'll have you back to talk about them, okay?
Thanks, Scott.
Have a great week and a great weekend. Coming up next week in the Lawmakers, the House can debate the charter schools issue anytime. We'll have complete coverage. When we return on Wednesday, we'll be discussing human trafficking and child welfare with U.S. Attorney Sally Yates and Senator Charlie Bethel. Thursday, we're talking about the state's decision to eliminate bariatric surgery from the state health benefit plan, plus all the latest news from under the Gold Dome. Next week in Primetime Lawmakers, this program will repeat tomorrow morning at 5:30. You can catch it then if you missed anything. Next on GPB, Georgia Outdoors. Tonight, Sharon Collins treks the great mysterious Okefenokee Swamp. Georgia Outdoors, Okefenokee is coming up next only on GPB. That's our broadcast for this 18th legislative day of the 2012 session. I'm Scott Slade. Join us next Wednesday at 7, the next legislative day for Primetime Lawmakers. Have a great Georgia Day over the weekend. Happy Valentine's Day next week. Good night.
This is a GPB original production.